To know that there's a book about the Wyoming blizzard of 1949 and how bad that sucker was. Congratulations on getting this published, by the way. This looks pretty detailed. Where'd you find this guy?
Well, I got to tell you, I believe, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, Cowgirls of the West loves history programs, and Christine Bird over at the old governor's mansion.
Right.
I called her up and went, hello, and she goes, I have this fabulous gentleman that I want to tell you about. Thus, James is going to be our guest speaker next Monday, October 8th, at Little America. So come on out and hear him. This is wonderful what he's writing about.
What made you want to write about this?
Well, it was kind of a not a fluke, if you want to call it that, but I had did the documentary with doing their research for them, and so I had over a year's worth of work, and at that point I was a little tired of seeing documents and pictures of the blizzard. But Arcadia Publishing contacted me last year and asked me would I consider writing some history, and I said that would be fine.
Absolutely, yeah.
They had asked about doing Cheyenne history, and I was like, well, I think that's good, but I said I have so many stories and so many photos that have never made to the documentary, and I said I know these folks would love to have their story told, and we went with it, and it was published this past July.
Take us through what happened. First off, exactly what time of year did this sucker hit?
It happened, according to all the weather reports, around January the 2nd, January the 3rd. I did talk to some people that said that even mid-December, there was still snow. There was snow already coming down. There were already being drifts that were just amazing. But January 2nd and January 3rd was when the storm actually started its effect across the United States. There were 6 states involved, not just Wyoming. But it started that day. And the wind, as we all know, when the wind comes here in Wyoming, there's a change in the weather. And a couple days before, they were reporting 90 to 100-mile-an-hour winds. So there was a big change in the atmospheric pressure and all the different little things that go with weather. But that's about the time frame it started and ended around mid-March.
In this day, in 2018, if a small town in Wyoming, well, they're all small towns in Wyoming, if a small town in Wyoming gets hit with something this bad, it's a little bit easier to get to them with the equipment we have now, some of the big Tonka toys, even though they did have some good equipment back in, let's see, again, this was 1949, and I looked at some of the pictures of the equipment. Still pretty impressive stuff, but the roads weren't as good. The equipment wasn't as good. We lose anybody?
In Cheyenne, or in Wyoming as a whole, we're about 17 people passed away. A lot of it was due to the fact they were stuck in cars.
Okay.
A lot of the victims that you hear about were driving on the out of Colorado into Wyoming, or were in Wyoming at the time, and the drifts just were built up so quickly that when they hit them, they were stuck, and then they had to figure out how to survive it. Some did, some didn't.
Sure. No, well, that makes sense, because if somebody was at home during something like that, well, Wyoming people already know, hey, it's wintertime, I'm going to be stuck at home for a while. So that just probably means they were stuck inside for a few days.
Absolutely, and that's what I've tried to tell a lot of people. A lot of people say, well, why didn't our town or why didn't our little city document it as well as another? And I've told them, I said, guys, even though I'm not from here, I'm originally from South Carolina, we understand it snows in Wyoming. So a lot of folks, I don't believe, looked at it as a big storm at that point. It was just another snowstorm in the middle of winter. It wasn't a big deal to them. Not that they didn't understand the effects the storm would have later on, but like you said, they just took care of business and did what they had to do and were just stuck at home, whereas some folks that were in rural areas could not get to certain places. So, I mean, it was a real weird balance on what, who survived, who didn't survive. I mean, when people were, packed into the gas station in Rockport, you got 40, 50 people in there. Now, granted, they've got food and they've got, supplies, but those supplies only last so long. The heat, maybe didn't go as good because some people were dealing with frostbite and shock and all these different things. So it's a weird way of looking at it, but when you see how Wyoming people survived, it was Wyoming people that survived, and sometimes these folks that were unfortunately passed away during the blizzard were not from Wyoming. They just didn't understand how bad this weather could get and how quickly it was going to come.
Well, on that note, it's not just so much snow. What were the temperatures?
Temperatures ranged, in the normal Fahrenheit 10 degrees, but then when the wind was kicking up, there were reports of at least -50 below in some areas. So, I mean, that you walk out in that and you're frostbit pretty quick.
Yeah, and this is where you got to make sure you have enough fuel available for something, not just food, just the fuel available to keep whatever you're inside warm. There's a few pictures in here, just a few pictures, of some rooftops that had collapsed inside some stores, it looked like.
Yeah, the snow had started packing up really high. The impact was not so much as the roofs coming in, because there were some roofs that gave in, but it was actually covering up heating vents and chimneys and carbon monoxide. In fact, I just the night I was in Gillette and speaking to somebody, and they told me, excuse me, that wasn't Gillette, that was Wheatland, and she had been one of the people here in Cheyenne that the snow had covered their house. And had it not been for a friend coming over to give them something, she went, something don't smell right. Why is everybody acting weird? And come to find out, I mean, they were all actually being, the gas was actually getting to them, and she had a 1 and a 3-year-old. So, I mean, it was just amazing to see her in her 90s telling the story, tearing up, saying, if it wouldn't have been for a friend, we would all lost our lives. So that was a huge part of that, yeah.
There's a big difference between the way snow acts here in Wyoming. I did live over in Massachusetts for a while. Snow there falls different. There's not as much wind, and so it piles up really high. In Wyoming, it tends just to blow across, and it doesn't really hit and gather anywhere until there's something physically to stop it. So I guess some of these towns would get lucky, like you mentioned Gillette briefly, as Gillette doesn't tend to gather until you get into a neighborhood. It tends just to blow right across the prairie.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then we have to think about the people who are living in areas where there might be mountains or hills or packed neighborhoods.
Yeah, and that, in fact, there's one story in the book where, we had some folks that were stuck in Laramie, and they couldn't understand how there was no snow, there was sunshine in one part, but there were reports they could not move the train because only 20 miles up the road, there were, 40, 50-foot drifts. And like you said, it's just according to where they were at was how the impact really took place with them.
We did have a storm that a few years ago was an October storm, and up in northeastern Wyoming, boy, we lost a lot of cattle. So I wonder, what about livestock during this storm?
It was a huge impact, very similar to the one in the 1800s. There were folks that were living at that time that had already been through that storm. I mean, they were the older generation, just like the folks I'm talking to now, and they compared the 49 blizzard to it as bad or even worse than that. And there were a lot of cattle that people lost. I mean, sheep, horses, cows, it doesn't matter. It was a huge loss. I mean, the impact wasn't as bad. It did not hurt the cattle industry like it did in the 1800s, but it did in some form. Some people would lose their whole livestock. So, I mean, it was really tough for those folks there in that time.
The Wyoming blizzard of 1949, surviving the storm, James C. Fuller. Forward by Sue, pronounce the last
Castaneda.
name. Castaneda. I was afraid of taking that one right there. Where do people get this? Where is it located at?
You can get it on my website at discoveringhistory.net, or you can even go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. But if you order from my website, they'll be signed and shipped out to you relatively quickly in a day or two.
Do I get to keep this one?
I'll get you one.
Damn straight, because I want a picture of you. I don't want to write up a story of this. So
absolutely.
Where do people find him for this? He's going to give a talk.
He's going to not only speak on it Monday, October 8th, Little America, 11:30. Mm-hmm. We need your reservation. However, James will have those books available for sale at our luncheon. Okay. So we have a wonderful luncheon, and James will be on, and he's going to do a PowerPoint so that you'll have an opportunity to see some of the pictures. The books will be available. We encourage you all to come out. All of our luncheons are open to the public, and all of our proceeds go to keep our little museum open.
Okay, good. Now, tell them real quick, we got to plug the museum here. You're located where?
Yes, we're located at 205 and 203 West 17th Street. We encourage everyone to come out and support local museums. And, of course, since we're Cowgirls of the West, we're interested in the history, particularly of the women of the West, as well as all of these other people. James has some fabulous stories, but without the ladies, trust me, gentlemen, you'd be sunk.
Yeah, it would know a long time ago. So, now, once again, how do they make reservations for this?
They want to make a reservation to Kathy, 632-0814. If they forget the phone number, they can come to the door. We'll be glad to have it. We just love everyone to come and hear these fabulous historical programs that people like James take the time to come out and present to us. And